If you have a Bible, I encourage you to take it out and turn in it to the book of Matthew. If you don't have a Bible, there may be one in the seat in front of you, or you can follow along on the screen. Matthew chapter number 27. Matthew chapter number 27. Today, we are celebrating and talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we are concluding a series that we started a few weeks ago called The King and His Kingdom. And really, we'll probably have one more after this. So come back next week and catch the finale, if you will. But today we're going to talk about the victory of the King. The victory of the King. Now, we're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, and we Christians recognize that when we say that we are celebrating the resurrection, that we are making a pretty bold claim. In fact, it could be a little bit far-fetched. It could be something that is out there. We are claiming that a man rose from the dead. Now, I don't know about you, but if I went to a cemetery to visit the grave of a loved one, and for some reason that grave was empty, my first thought would not be, oh, well, they must have risen from the dead. That would not be the first thought that I had. And yet, that is what the first people who went to the tomb where Jesus was buried after his death, and they found the tomb empty, that's what they began to claim and to proclaim. And Matthew, one of the disciples, is writing this gospel account, this account of what he calls the good news. And when he gets to the resurrection, he wants us to understand that all of the evidence is actually pointing to the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. In fact, what he wants us to know is that the best explanation for the empty tomb that was found by the first people who went, the best explanation for that empty tomb is that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, Matthew is writing here, and he's writing about this passion of Jesus, about his suffering and his death, and then eventually his resurrection. But he mentions something that's really interesting here, at the end of the scene of his death on the cross. You see it there in verse number 50, where it says, "But Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and gave up his spirit." So this is talking about when Jesus died. "And suddenly the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom," the curtain in the temple that separated the holy place from the most holy place, the presence of God from the rest of the people. "And it was torn in two. The earth quaked, and the rocks were split." And all of this is showing something we mentioned last week about how Jesus' death on the cross is giving us access to an inaccessible God, a God that we can't come to because of sin, but Jesus is giving us access through his death to God the Father. And then it says in verse 52, "The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised." Isn't that interesting? That the tombs opened, and the people who had died previously, saints who had died previously, they rose to life again, and they came out of the tombs after his resurrection, entered the holy city, that's Jerusalem, and appeared to many. So it's not just some claim. They actually appeared to people and talked to them. And you're wondering what in the world is going on here. And I think what this is Matthew giving us a foreshadowing that Jesus' death is not the end, that there is something more that is coming. And so he continues on with the story, and he tells us what that more that is coming is. Now, what Matthew does is he wants us to understand two main points that he's wanting to make. And the first one is that when it comes to Jesus' tomb, when Jesus was buried, Jesus' tomb was known. It was known. So look with me down in verse 55. It says, many women who had followed Jesus from Galilee and looked after him were there, watching from a distance. That is, they were there at the crucifixion site. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Zebedee was the father of James and John, two of the 12 disciples of Jesus. And so their mother was there at the cross. So you have two Marys and another woman who was there at the cross, witnessing from a distance everything going on. Verse 57, when it was evening, a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph came, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. Other Gospels tell us he was kind of a secret disciple. He hadn't yet kind of like publicly made this profession that he was trusting and following Jesus, but yet he believed Jesus was who he said he was, and was secretly kind of following him. He was a part of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish religious council, and so he was a wealthy, well-known man. And he approached Pilate, verse 58, and asked for Jesus' body. Then Pilate ordered that it be released. So Joseph took the body, wrapped it in clean, fine linen, and placed it in his new tomb, which he had cut into the rock. Now, what normally happened is after crucifixion, many times that they just discarded the bodies of those people who had died by crucifixion. They were either put in a mass grave, or they were left hanging on the cross for a couple of days until they could get to that. They were treated barbarically, and Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, didn't want that to happen to Jesus. And so he took him down to give him a proper burial and asked Pilate if he could do such. Pilate gives him that, gives him the ability to do that. And then he places him in his own tomb that he had actually cut out of the rock himself. And then it says he left after rolling a great stone against the entrance of the tomb. And look what it says in verse 61. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were seated there facing the tomb. Now Matthew puts that there because he wants to say that the same Marys who were at the crucifixion followed everything that happened after the crucifixion, and they saw where Jesus was buried. They saw the tomb where Jesus was buried, and they saw him go in there. They saw Joseph put him in there as he prepared him just before the Sabbath preparation. Okay? So Jesus' tomb was known. It was known. The second thing Matthew wants us to understand is that Jesus' tomb was secure. Okay? So look with me in verse 62. The next day, which followed the preparation day, that's the preparation for the Sabbath, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate. So Pilate gets another group of people coming and said, "Sir, we remember that while this deceiver was still alive, he said, 'After 3 days, I will rise again.'" So they're a little bit nervous because Jesus has been claiming that he's going to rise from the dead. And so they're like, well, so give orders that the tomb would be made, what's the word there? Secure. That the tomb would be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, here's what's going to happen. His disciples may come, steal him, and tell the people that he's been raised from the dead. And the last deception will be worse than the first. In other words, you think that Jesus was a problem for us and for you while he was living. Imagine if he could claim he was raised from the dead, the difference he would make. Oh, and by the way, imagine if Jesus rose from the dead, the difference he would make. So Pilate says, you have a guard of soldiers. Go and make it, what's the word, as secure as you know how. So they went, and what did they do? They secured the tomb by setting a seal on the stone and placing the guard. So you have here them securing the tomb. Jesus' tomb was secure. They put a seal on it, which means that they probably put some clay around the edges, and they put a seal on the front with the Roman insignia stamped on that seal, and they attached it with ropes. So it was roped off, it was sealed, and if anybody broke that seal to get into the tomb for any reason, then they would have to answer to Rome. And if you remember me telling you, even if you don't remember, one of the things that they would do is they would crucify people along the edges of the road, the side of the road, because they wanted people to know this is what happens when you mess with Rome. So nobody wanted to mess with Rome. And so nobody's going to go through that seal. And not only is there a seal there, it says before that Joseph rolled a big stone over the mouth of the tomb, and there's guards there. There are guards there. So it's guarded, it's sealed, it's stamped, and it is secure. And what Matthew wants us to know is that nobody is getting in that tomb. Now, what they didn't understand was that the problem was not going to be about anybody getting in the tomb. The problem was going to be somebody getting out of the tomb. Okay. Now, Matthew is really trying to show that what these people are doing is they're saying, we don't want anything else to happen. We don't think it's going to happen, but we don't want anything else to happen. Well, something happens. Chapter 28, verse 1. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to view the tomb. Who was it that did it? It was Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. I think we've seen them a couple times already before. People who knew where the tomb was, they saw everything unfold, and they go to view the tomb. There was a violent earthquake because an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and approached the tomb. He rolled back the stone and was sitting on it. And by the way, he wasn't rolling back the stone so that Jesus could get out. He was rolling back the stone so that the people out there could see in. He rolled back the stone and was sitting on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards were so shaken by fear of him that they became like dead men. They passed out. Okay, so weak. Can you believe how weak they were? Okay. They just passed out after seeing this awesome sight of an angel. The angel told the women, and I love this, don't be afraid. Can I just say, just real quick, and we're going to talk about it in just a minute, but if you are one of the ones like the guards who don't believe in Jesus, then fear would be a natural response. But if you are one of the ones who believes in Jesus, then you don't need to be afraid. Don't be afraid, because I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here, for he has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has risen from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Listen, I have told you. So departing quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, they ran to tell his disciples the news. Just then, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." They came up, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus told them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there." So something happens. Jesus rises from the dead. The women go and they find an empty tomb. And Matthew, in writing all of this, is really trying to tell us that, really combating against a couple of different arguments against the resurrection. So Matthew's writing 40 or so odd years after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And by this time, there are some rumors circulating about what's really happened. one of those rumors was that the women went to the wrong tomb. That they were so distraught in their grief that they took a wrong turn. They went into the wrong garden and they found the wrong tomb, and it was already open. Nobody was there. And they're like, Jesus must have risen from the dead. Oh, and we saw an angel. Let's go tell the disciples about this and spread this rumor about this. Well, Matthew wants us to know that they knew where the tomb was. Some people say they were so grieving that they were crying and that the tears kept them from seeing the bright path to go, which is kind of crazy to think about. Okay. Anything that people can say to give an explanation different than what really happened. And so the women knew where the tomb was. They saw where he was crucified. They followed everything along. You could ask Joseph of Arimathea, is this your tomb? You could also, if you could get it out of him, you could ask the guards, because the guards were there. So the guards knew where the tomb was, and the women watched it all happen. Everybody knew where the tomb was. So one of the things was that they went to the wrong tomb. And the bigger rumor was that the disciples stole the body. Okay? In fact, Matthew even tells us what happens about this here in verse number 11. He says, as they were on their way, some of the guards came into the city, so the guards who were at the tomb, and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. So the religious leaders who hired them to guard the tomb, they come back after they've passed out, and when they wake up, you can imagine they also find the tomb empty. And they are, in fact, their lives are in danger. And they go back and they report to the chief priest everything that happened. After the priests had assembled with the elders and they agreed on a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, they bribed them, and told them, say this, his disciples came during the night and stole him while we were sleeping. If this reaches the governor's ears, that's Pilate, then we will deal with him and keep you out of trouble. So don't worry about your life, you just lie about it. And Matthew says they took the money, did as they were instructed, and this story has been spread among Jewish people to this day. 30, 40, maybe even 50 years later, that rumor is still circulating that the disciples came in and stole the body. But how? That's impossible. That's impossible. There was a large stone over it. There was a seal placed on it. The guards themselves, the chief priests, made it so secure nobody was getting in the tomb. Nobody's breaking that seal. Nobody's getting past the guards. And one other thing, some of you women will not like this, and you shouldn't actually, but one of the things that is evidence that this story is true of the resurrection is the fact that Matthew had women be the first witnesses. Because in the first century, women were not considered credible witnesses in a legal court. So if there was a case in a court, you would not bring a woman to testify in the court because they were not considered credible witnesses. Now, we all know that that's not true, but that's the way it was in the first century. And so if Matthew is going to be making up some kind of legend that he's going to perpetuate as a rumor about the resurrection of Jesus, he's not going to say that women were the first people to see that happen, unless it really happened. Now, listen. The point that I'm trying to make, not me, the point Matthew's trying to make is that the best explanation for the empty tomb is that Jesus rose from the dead. That's the best explanation. You can think of all the different things that you want to think about that argue against that. And there's a lot of reasons why people do that, because a lot of people don't want to come to terms with this very fact. But I'm telling you that the best explanation, not an explanation, not even one of the best explanations, the best explanation for the empty tomb is that Jesus rose from the dead. Now listen. If that's true, And we Christians believe it is. In fact, we believe it is to such a degree that we have staked our entire faith and our entire lives on it. Everything about the resurrection, or everything about our faith, I should say, hinges on the truth of the resurrection. So if this is true, this has massive implications for you and me. The first implication that it has is that if this is true, if Jesus really did rise from the dead, then that means that Jesus' identity was vindicated. So Matthew is taking his entire gospel account, and what he's attempting to do is to show to his readers that Jesus is the long-awaited, promised Messianic King. That he is the one God promised would come to be the Savior of the world and to rule forever and ever. And that has really ratcheted up in the last couple of chapters. Jesus himself is making this claim. He is claiming to be this Messianic forever King. He is claiming to be the very Son of God. So much so that he is mocked for it and insulted for it. The soldiers would mock him. They dressed him up like a king, and they're like, "Oh, hail, King of the Jews." They crucified him for it. The chief priests, the religious leaders of the people, mocked him and said, "Oh yeah, if he's the Son of God, let him come down from the cross and prove it to us." The people passing by as they see him crucified, the people passing by that see that are like, "He saved others, he can't even save himself. How is he the Son of God? How is he the King if he can't even save himself? How's he going to rule forever if he's dying right now?" They mocked him, they insulted him, they crucified him for claiming that. But listen, if Jesus rose from the dead, that means everything he said about himself is true. Everything he said about himself is right. He really is the King. His identity was vindicated by the resurrection. But not only that, what it means is that Jesus' teachings are true. So that means that it's not only about what Jesus said about himself, it's about what Jesus said about everything else. It's what Jesus said about you. It's what Jesus said about the world. It's what Jesus said about how we should order our lives, about what is right and good, about what God expects of people, about what God has said about the world, that the biblical worldview is right and true. Everything Jesus taught is true. Think about it. That means that it is true that the pure in heart are the ones who see God. That it is true that murder begins in the heart with anger. And that adultery begins in the heart with lust. It is true that it's not what goes into your mouth that defiles a person, but it's what comes out of your mouth that defiles a person. Because what comes out of your mouth comes from your heart. It is true that Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me." That's true. It's true that Jesus said, "I'm the light of the world, and anyone who believes in me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." That's true if Jesus rose from the dead. It's true when Jesus said, "I'm the bread of life, and if you believe in me, that you'll never hunger ever again." That's true. It's true that Jesus said in John 11 that I am the resurrection and the life, and he who believes in me, or she who believes in me, whoever it is that believes in me, will never die. Oh, and if you physically die, yet shall you live. Boy, those are some big claims, but listen, if Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, then everything that he said and everything he taught was true. But it also means not only was his identity vindicated and not only was his teachings true, but it also means that his mission was successful. You see, what we say is that when Jesus died on the cross, Jesus was dying for the sin of the world. That he was dying for your sin and my sin. That he was dying on the cross in our place for our sin. That's what Jesus' death was doing. The question is how do we know that Jesus' death was actually paying the penalty for our sin? That it actually atoned for our sin? You know how we know? The resurrection. The resurrection is God stamping his approval on the sacrifice Jesus offered. How do we know that Jesus' death really did pay for the sin of the world? Because God raised him to life again 3 days later. And it proved that Jesus really did atone for your sin and for my sin. Now, if all of that is true, and I believe it is, and I believe there's good evidence for that, then that means a couple of things for us. And here it is. Here's really kind of what I want you to leave with. It means a couple things. It means a couple of massive things, actually. Okay. If Jesus' identity was vindicated, okay, and his teachings were true and his mission was successful, then the first thing that means is that our defiance should turn to obedience. You know what the great sin is of humanity? The great sin is that we have rebelled against and defied God Almighty. And if Jesus' teachings are all true, everything he said is true, then what that means is we should order our lives around what he said. Like, Jesus should not become, and his teachings should not just become something we kind of like pick and choose. It's kind of like the way Thomas Jefferson had his Bible. You've ever heard of the Jefferson Bible? The Jefferson Bible was that Thomas Jefferson, who by the way was not a Christian theist, he was a deist, meaning that he believed that God created everything and then he just kind of spun the world like a clock and he just watches it go around, but he doesn't have any like influence on the world. He has no involvement in the world. So what he would do is he would cut out the things of his Bible that he didn't really like, and he would just kind of cut those things out, but he would leave the things that he really liked. And he would kind of paste it and, copied and pasted back, before copy and paste was a thing. But he would kind of like literally cut this stuff out, put it in there, and he had his own Bible. It's known as the Jefferson Bible, okay? And a lot of us, we think too highly of the Bible. We won't even set a coffee mug on our Bible, okay? But what many of us do is we will do the same exact thing. We just won't cut it physically. We'll just decide, well, I'm not going to live by that. I don't like that part. That doesn't fit with what I want for my life. That doesn't really fit with what I think is, right and whatever. Like my standard of justice has any bearing on anything, by the way. Like my standard of right and wrong has anything anyway, but I'm just going to disregard that type of stuff, and I'm going to hold on to the things that, sound good and feel good and kind of fit with what I want out of my life. But listen, if Jesus rose from the dead and all of his teachings are true, then what that means is that our defiance and our rebellion against the plan and the purpose and the will of God, all of that should turn toward obedience. And when I say obedience, I mean flat out, full, everything that he said, we accept it, believe it, and obey it. Okay? Imagine if we lived as Christians as if this right here were really true. Not only that, but it also means not only that our defiance should turn to obedience, but it means our disregard should turn to worship. Did you notice what happened when the women see Jesus here? It says that they came up, took hold of his feet, and they worshiped him. You see, if Jesus really is the Son of God, the Messianic King, and I've said this for a few weeks now, the proper response to that is worship. Do you know what worship is? Worship, part of it is what we did up here earlier, where we sing. But that's not all that is. Part of it is what we're doing now. Part of it is what we do every day when we wake up. You know, every day we're worshiping something. But listen, worship is simply, both in the Old and the New Testaments, worship simply means this. Literally, the word means to prostrate yourself. That's what worship is. And so worship, in a biblical sense, means to bow your heart to something or someone. And what I want to say to you, just plainly, is that if Jesus rose from the dead, and he is who he said he is, then the only one who is worthy of your heart being bowed to him is Jesus Christ. He alone is worthy of your life of worship. He alone. So, defiance should turn to obedience. Your disregard should turn to worship. And lastly, your fear should turn to joy. Did you catch what was said twice in this passage? The angel said to the women, "Don't be afraid." Jesus said to the women, "Don't be afraid." And then it says that when they left the tomb, departing quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy. Now listen, I think that what they experienced first when they saw it all was genuine fear. What has happened? What's going on? I'm scared. But I think that once they saw and heard the good news, that fear, instead of it being scared, it became wonder and amazement. Can you believe it? Because if Jesus really did die on the cross and rise from the dead, that means that we can be forgiven. It means that we can be right with God. It means that we can have access with the Heavenly Father. It means that God is going to bring everything that's wrong and make it right. And so all of the fear that we live with, and there's a lot of it in this world. In fact, I'm pretty sure that what this world wants to do, the world system wants to do, is create in you a deep sense of fear. Because feared people who are fearful, can be controlled. But I want you to understand that your fear because of Jesus' resurrection can turn to joy. And you can obey the commands that are given in the Bible, where Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5 to rejoice always. Like, isn't that an amazing thing? How do you command somebody to have an emotion? Well, you rejoice as a choice. I didn't mean to say it like that, but you rejoice. You rejoice in such a way because Jesus is alive. You don't have to be afraid anymore. No matter what happens, I told them this morning over at the sunrise service. I told them this morning, listen, if Jesus rose from the dead, then everything is going to be okay. It is. Because God is going to make all things new. And He's going to start, listen, He's going to start by making it new in your own heart. He's going to start making all things new by making you new. And when He makes you new, you know what He's going to fill you with? His Holy Spirit. And when He fills you with His Holy Spirit, He's going to fill you with His joy. And you can live in the joy of the Lord, which will be your strength in days that are trouble. So, I'm hoping this morning that what we've said will encourage some Christian. In fact, I hope what it will do is I hope it will rekindle the joy in your life. I hope that you will live with a sense of joy. I hope that you'll live with a sense of certainty and assurance that everything is going to be okay. But here's what I also hope. I hope that if you are not a person who has chosen yet to follow Jesus, that it will convince you that Jesus is the only one you should follow. In fact, what I'm asking you to do this morning is I'm asking you to lay down your arms, to give up any resistance and defiance that you may have toward God, and to submit and bow your heart to Him, and to believe, and not just believe mentally, but to believe so much that you will stake your life on the truth of who His Son said He is, what He's done, and what He'll do in your life if you'll give your life to Him. You see, if the resurrection didn't happen, then none of what I said today really matters. We've just wasted 40 minutes. But if the resurrection of Jesus is true, then nothing else matters more.